Everything seemed hollow and dead. A massive fallen oak tree in the heart of the Great Smoky Mountains, its trunk split open by decades of decay. But hidden within its rotting heart was a secret that had waited nearly a century to be found, and it would change one boy's desperate escape into an impossible revelation. 10-year-old Caleb Washington had been running through the Tennessee mountain forest for 3 hours, his thin legs burning with exhaustion, his lungs raw from the cold November air. Behind him, somewhere in the endless trees, were the voices of adults from the boy's home in Gatlinburg. Adults who would take him back to a place where he was just a number, just another problem to be managed, just another black child that the system had given up on. The group home director had made it clear that morning. "One more incident, Caleb, and you're going to the youth detention center. We've tried everything with you, and nothing works. You're out of chances." The incident had been defending himself when 2 older boys had stolen his only photograph. A faded picture of his mother, taken a month before she died when Caleb was 6. He had fought to get it back, and in the fight, a window had been broken. Nobody had asked who started it. Nobody had cared that the photograph was the only thing Caleb had left of his mother. They had only seen a violent outburst from a troubled child. So Caleb had run. Again. This was his 4th escape attempt in 6 months, but this time he had planned better. He had stolen a backpack and filled it with supplies during the night. Food, water bottles, a blanket, matches he had taken from the kitchen. He had waited until the morning shift change when staff were distracted. And then he had simply walked out the back door and into the national park that bordered the group home property. He knew it was probably stupid. He knew he would likely get caught. But he also knew that the youth detention center was where kids went to get broken, and Caleb was barely holding himself together as it was. If he was going to break, he wanted to do it on his own terms, in the mountains his mother had loved, surrounded by trees instead of concrete walls. The fallen oak appeared through the forest like an answer to a prayer Caleb hadn't known he was praying. It was massive, maybe 8 feet in diameter, at least 60 feet long, lying across a small ravine like a bridge built by giants. The trunk had split lengthwise, creating a hollow cavity large enough for a small person to crawl inside. Caleb approached cautiously, checking for animals. The opening was partially hidden by ferns and mountain laurel, and the interior was surprisingly dry despite the recent rains. The wood had rotted away in places, creating natural openings that allowed light and air to filter through, but the main cavity was sheltered and concealed. If you enjoy rural mystery stories about forgotten children and shocking discoveries, like this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this story will hold you from the very first moment. Caleb crawled inside, pulling his backpack with him. The space was bigger than it looked from outside, maybe 6 feet long and 4 feet wide, tall enough to sit up in comfortably. The wood was soft with decay, but still structurally sound, and someone, some animal, or maybe the wind, had filled the bottom with dried leaves that made a surprisingly comfortable cushion. It was perfect. A hiding place where no one would think to look, where Caleb could rest and figure out his next move. Maybe he could survive out here for a few days, long enough for the search to move on, long enough to get farther away. He had seen a documentary once about a kid who lived in the forest for months. Maybe Caleb could do the same. He was arranging his supplies when his hand brushed against something that wasn't wood or leaves. Something hard and square, wrapped in what felt like oilcloth, wedged into a crevice in the tree trunk where decay hadn't yet reached. Caleb pulled it out carefully. The oilcloth was old, darkened with age and moisture, but it had done its job. The package inside was dry. His hands trembled as he unwrapped it, revealing a metal box about the size of a shoebox, its surface rusted but intact. The box wasn't locked. The lid opened with a shriek of protesting metal, and Caleb found himself staring at contents that made no sense at first. Papers, folded and yellowed with age. A small leather journal. Several photographs, their images faded but still visible. And something wrapped in cloth that clinked with the sound of metal on metal. Caleb lifted out the photographs first. They showed black people, men, women, children, standing in front of log cabins, working in fields, gathered in what looked like a church or meeting house. The clothing and photographic quality suggested these were very old, maybe from the early 1900s. On the back of one photograph, written in careful handwriting, was a date: Cades Cove, Tennessee, 1928. Cades Cove. Caleb knew that name. It was a historic settlement in the Smoky Mountains, now part of the national park. His fourth-grade class had taken a field trip there, walking through preserved buildings and learning about the families who had lived in the isolated mountain valley before the government bought their land to create the park. But Caleb didn't remember learning about black families in Cades Cove. The tour guide had talked about white settlers, about Scots-Irish immigrants, about churches and schools and mills. There had been no mention of people who looked like the ones in these photographs. He opened the leather journal carefully, its pages brittle with age. The first entry was dated January 1928, written in the same careful handwriting as the photograph inscription. This journal belongs to Isaiah Washington, freedman, resident of Cades Cove since 1867. I am 84 years old, and the government men say we must leave our land by the end of this year so they can make a park. They say we will be compensated fairly, but I have lived long enough to know what fairly means when white men talk to black men about land. I hide this journal and our family papers in the old oak tree where my son Josiah and I used to hunt. If any of my descendants find this, know that we were here. We built lives here. We owned land here, free and clear. Do not let them erase us from the history of this place. Isaiah Washington. Caleb read the entry 3 times, his heart pounding. Isaiah Washington. His last name was Washington. Could this Isaiah be his ancestor? His great-great-grandfather, maybe, or great-great-great-grandfather. He flipped through more pages of the journal. Isaiah had documented everything. The arrival of his family in Cades Cove in 1867, just after the Civil War. The purchase of 40 acres of land with money Isaiah had saved during and after slavery. The building of a cabin and barn. The births of his children. The establishment of a small church for the black families in the area. Families that Caleb had never heard mentioned in any history book or museum display. But the later entries grew darker. Government surveyors came in 1926, explaining that the land would be purchased for a national park. Isaiah described meetings where black landowners were offered far less money than white landowners for equivalent property. He wrote about families being pressured to sell, about threats of eminent domain, about the slow dismantling of the black community in Cades Cove. The final entry, dated November 1928, made Caleb's throat tighten. We must leave next week. They have given us no choice. The white families received fair compensation and help relocating. We received half as much and no assistance. They say our deeds are questionable, though we have paid taxes for 60 years. They are erasing us deliberately, and I fear that once we are gone, they will pretend we were never here. I hide these papers and this journal where I used to hide as a boy, in the great oak that stood when I first came to this valley as a free man. If my family ever returns, if they ever seek our history, let them find this truth. We were here. We built. We owned. We mattered. Do not let them make us invisible. Caleb sat in the hollow tree, surrounded by evidence of a history no one had told him, holding proof that his family, if Isaiah Washington truly was his ancestor, had owned land in these mountains, had built lives here, had been systematically erased from the historical record. He looked at the other items in the box. Property deeds, yellowed and fragile, showing Isaiah Washington's purchase of 40 acres in Cades Cove in 1867. Tax receipts from every year between 1867 and 1928. Birth certificates and marriage licenses. Letters from lawyers about the park purchase. And in the cloth bundle, hidden at the bottom of the box, 7 silver dollars, a gold watch, and what looked like a wedding ring. Family treasures, Caleb whispered, understanding what he was looking at. Isaiah had hidden not just documents, but valuables, things that could be sold for money if his descendants needed help, physical proof of wealth and ownership that couldn't be dismissed as easily as paper records. The sound of voices in the distance, adults calling his name, broke through Caleb's revelation. The search party was getting closer, maybe only a few hundred yards away. He could hear dogs barking, their handlers encouraging them to track. Caleb made a split-second decision. He carefully wrapped the most important documents, the journal, the deeds, several photographs, in the oilcloth and stuffed them into his backpack. The rest he left in the metal box, which he pushed back into the crevice where it had hidden for nearly a century. If he was caught, when he was caught, they would take his backpack. They would find the documents. And maybe, just maybe, that would lead to someone asking questions about Isaiah Washington and the other black families who had been erased from Cades Cove's history. But as the voices grew louder and the dog sounds more excited, Caleb realized he was facing an impossible choice. Let himself be found with the documents, which would mean going back to the group home and probably losing the papers to adults who wouldn't care about their significance, or hide the documents and try to stay free long enough to get them to someone who would listen. He looked at Isaiah's journal, at the careful handwriting of a man who had survived slavery only to watch his land and community be taken by a different kind of theft. Isaiah had hidden the truth, hoping someone would find it. And Caleb had found it. But what good was finding the truth if he couldn't protect it? The barking was close now, maybe 50 yards away. Through the gaps in the tree trunk, Caleb could see flashlight beams sweeping through the forest. In moments, they would find the fallen oak. They would find him. Caleb clutched his backpack and Isaiah's legacy and made a decision that felt both desperate and right. He would not hide anymore. He would let them find him, but he would not let them silence him about what he had discovered. He would not let Isaiah Washington be erased again. He crawled out of the hollow tree and stood in the fading afternoon light, holding his backpack close, waiting for the adults to arrive, and hoping that somewhere among them might be one person willing to listen to a throwaway kid's impossible story about hidden history and stolen land. The first adult to reach Caleb was Officer Maria Santos from the Gatlinburg Police Department, a compact Latina woman in her 30s who looked exhausted and relieved in equal measure. Behind her came 2 group home staff members and a National Park Service ranger Caleb didn't recognize. "Caleb Washington," Officer Santos said, not unkindly. "Do you have any idea how worried everyone has been? 3 hours in these woods, temperature dropping, night coming. You could have gotten seriously hurt." "I'm fine," Caleb said, his voice steadier than he felt. His hand gripped the backpack strap tightly. "I found something important." "You can tell us about it back at the—" One of the group home staff started, but the park ranger interrupted. "Wait. What did you find, son?" The ranger was a black man, maybe in his 50s. with gray in his hair and crow's feet around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His name tag read, Ranger Thomas Green. Caleb looked at him, at the interest in his expression that seemed genuine rather than just procedural. Papers, old papers, from 1928, hidden in that tree. He pointed at the fallen oak behind him. There was a metal box, a journal written by a man named Isaiah Washington. He said he lived in Cades Cove. He was black, and he owned land here, but the government took it when they made the park. And he said they erased all the black families from the history, that nobody would know we were ever here. Ranger Green's expression shifted from interest to intense focus. Isaiah Washington, from Cades Cove? He pulled out a radio. This is Ranger Green. I need to contact the park historian immediately. Tell Dr. Morrison I've got a child who's found historical documents related to black land ownership in Cades Cove. He looked back at Caleb. Can I see what you found? Caleb hesitated, looking at Officer Santos and the group home staff. Are you going to take them away? Put them in storage where nobody cares about them? Nobody's taking anything away, Ranger Green said firmly. But if you've really found evidence of black families in Cades Cove, that's historically significant. The park's been criticized for years for not adequately documenting or acknowledging the African American families who lived here before the park was created. We've been trying to research that history, but most of the records were lost or destroyed. He knelt down to Caleb's eye level. What you found could change what we know about this place, but I need to see it to know if it's authentic. Slowly, Caleb opened his backpack and pulled out the oilcloth bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing Isaiah's journal and the documents. Ranger Green's hands trembled slightly as he accepted them, holding them with the reverence of someone who understood their value. He opened the journal to the first page, reading silently, his expression growing more emotional with each line. "My God," he whispered. "This is real. This is a first-hand account from a freedman who purchased land in the cove. We've known there were black families here. Census records show that. But we've never had direct documentation of their experience, their property ownership, their perspective on the park creation." He looked at Caleb with something like awe. "Where exactly did you find this?" Caleb pointed to the fallen oak. "Inside. There's a hollow part, and the box was hidden in a crack in the wood. There's more stuff still in there. More photographs, deeds, some silver dollars, and a gold watch." Ranger Green was already on his radio again. "I need a recovery team at my location. We've got a cache of historical documents from the 1920s, possibly earlier. Handle with extreme care. These are irreplaceable primary sources." He turned back to Caleb. "You're not in trouble for finding this. You did exactly the right thing by being careful with it." "He's in trouble for running away from the group home," one of the staff members interjected sharply. "Again, for the fourth time. And now we're going to have to—" "Actually," Officer Santos interrupted, her voice cool, "we're going to have a conversation about why a 10-year-old feels the need to run away from your facility repeatedly. That's what we're going to do." She looked at Caleb. "What happened today, Caleb? Why did you run?" Caleb didn't want to answer, didn't want to be vulnerable in front of these adults who had already decided he was the problem. But something about Officer Santos's expression, about the way Ranger Green was handling Isaiah's journal like it was precious, made him decide to risk the truth. "They were going to send me to youth detention," he said quietly, "because I got in a fight. But I was just trying to get my mom's picture back. The other boys took it, and it's the only thing I have of her. And when I tried to get it back, we broke a window. And Mr. Harris didn't even ask what happened. He just said I was violent and out of control, and that I'd had my last chance. "Did you get the photograph back?" Ranger Green asked gently. Caleb shook his head, tears threatening now. One of them tore it, while I was being pulled away by staff. They tore it and laughed, and nobody cared because I'm the one who's troubled. Officer Santos and Ranger Green exchanged a long look. Then the officer turned to the group home staff. "We'll discuss this back at the station. Ranger Green, how long do you need with the boy?" "I've called our park historian, Dr. Sarah Morrison. She's on her way from the visitor center. Should be here in about 20 minutes. I'd like Caleb to show us exactly where he found the box and to be present when we recover the remaining items. His account of the discovery is part of the historical record now." "He needs to return to the group home," the staff member protested. "He needs to be part of documenting what might be one of the most significant historical discoveries in this park's history," Ranger Green countered. "After which, Officer Santos can determine appropriate placement. But this boy just found evidence of his ancestors' history. The least we can do is let him be present while we recover it properly." Over the next hour, as the sun set behind the mountains and portable lights were set up around the fallen oak, Caleb watched a team of park rangers and historians carefully extract the metal box from its hiding place. Dr. Morrison, a white woman in her 60s with kind eyes and careful hands, photographed everything in situ before touching it, documenting the exact location and condition of each item. "This is extraordinary," she kept murmuring as she examined each piece of evidence. Property deeds showing clear ownership, tax receipts proving continuous habitation, personal letters describing the forced relocation, and this journal. She held Isaiah's record like it was made of glass. This is a primary source that changes our understanding of who lived in these mountains and what happened to them. She turned to Caleb. "How did you know to look inside the tree?" "I didn't," Caleb admitted. "I was hiding, running away from the group home. The tree was just there, big enough to crawl inside, and when I did, I felt something that wasn't wood, so I pulled it out." Dr. Morrison looked at Ranger Green. "Hiding from the group home in the exact same tree where Isaiah Washington hid his family's records while hiding from the government. That's..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "That's more than coincidence." "Maybe," Ranger Green said softly. "Or maybe some kinds of refuge just call to the people who need them most." As the recovery operation continued, Caleb sat on a log nearby, wrapped in the emergency blanket one of the rangers had given him. Officer Santos sat beside him, her notepad out, but her pen still. "Caleb," she said quietly, "tell me honestly, how bad is it at the group home?" "It's not." Caleb started, then stopped. What was the point of lying? "It's not the worst place I've been, but it's not good either. Mr. Harris doesn't like me. Some of the other kids are mean. And whenever something goes wrong, they always assume it's my fault, because I've run away before, so obviously I'm the problem. And today, with the photograph?" Nobody asked what happened. Nobody asked if I was okay, or if the picture could be fixed, or why those boys took it in the first place. They just saw broken glass and me fighting, and that was enough. I was the problem that needed to be removed. Officer Santos nodded slowly, writing notes. "You know I'm going to have to take you back tonight, right? Or somewhere. You can't stay in the woods." "I know," Caleb said. "But can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What happens to the stuff I found? Isaiah's journal and the papers? Will people actually care about it? Or will it just go in a box somewhere and get forgotten again?" Dr. Morrison, who had apparently been listening, approached them. "Caleb, I promise you, I swear to you, that what you found today will not be forgotten. We're going to study these documents. We're going to use them to research the Black families who lived in Cades Cove. We're going to add their stories to the park's official history. And we're going to credit you as the person who found this cache and brought this history to light. 2. And if Isaiah Washington was really my ancestor? Caleb asked. If I'm really related to him? Then you have a personal connection to this history that makes it even more important, Dr. Morrison said. We'll help you research your family tree. If you are descended from Isaiah, then you have every right to be involved in how his story is told. She paused. Can I ask you something? Did you read the journal? Do you know what Isaiah wrote about his life? Caleb nodded. He wrote about being free after slavery, about buying land and building a home, about his family and his church, and about how they took it all away when they made the park, about how they tried to erase everyone like him from the history. He was right, Dr. Morrison said, her voice heavy with regret. When the park was created, Black families were systematically undercompensated for their land and excluded from the historical narrative. We've been trying to correct that for years, but without primary sources, without first-hand accounts, it's been almost impossible. Until now. She looked at Caleb intently. You gave us back a piece of history that was stolen. That matters. You matter. Officer Santos took Caleb to the Sevierville police station rather than directly back to the group home. I need to file a report, she explained, and I want to talk to your caseworker before making any decisions about placement. They sat in a small interview room with comfortable chairs and a table that wasn't bolted to the floor. Nothing like the police stations Caleb had seen on TV. Officer Santos brought him hot chocolate from a vending machine and a sandwich from her own dinner. Eat, she said. You've been running through the woods for hours. You need food. While Caleb ate, Officer Santos made phone calls. He could hear her through the partially open door, her voice firm and professional. Fourth escape attempt in 6 months suggests the placement isn't appropriate. Yes, I'm aware of the behavioral reports, but I'm also aware that this child just made a historically significant discovery and showed remarkable responsibility in protecting those documents. I don't care what Mr. Harris says. I'm not returning Caleb to that facility tonight. She came back into the room with another woman, black, maybe 40 years old, wearing professional clothes and carrying a tablet. Caleb, this is Ms. Regina Foster. She's a caseworker supervisor with the State Child Services Department. Ms. Foster sat down across from Caleb, her expression serious, but not unkind. I've been reviewing your file, Caleb. 6 placements in 4 years, multiple escape attempts, behavioral incidents at each location. You've had a rough time in the system. Caleb said nothing. What was there to say? Adults never really wanted to hear the truth about why foster care was so hard. But, Ms. Foster continued, Officer Santos has also told me about what you found today, about the historical documents and your possible connection to Isaiah Washington. And I've been on the phone with Dr. Morrison from the Park Service. She leaned forward. Caleb, I want to understand something. You found documents that could be valuable, historically and potentially monetarily. You could have hidden them, kept them for yourself, maybe even tried to sell them, but instead, you shared them with the authorities. Why? Caleb thought about that. Because Isaiah Washington wanted someone to find them. He wanted people to know his family was there, that they mattered. If I hid them or sold them, that wouldn't happen. And? He hesitated, then continued. And they're not just his story. If he's really my ancestor, then they're my story too. And I don't want my story to be about stealing or hiding the truth. I want it to be about something better than that. Ms. Foster nodded slowly. That's a very mature perspective. She looked at Officer Santos, then back at Caleb. Here's what's going to happen. You're not going back to the group home tonight. We're placing you in emergency foster care with a family that specializes in short-term crisis placements. Tomorrow, we're going to have a meeting with everyone involved. Your caseworker, representatives from the Park Service, possibly a family law attorney, to figure out long-term placement that's actually appropriate for you. What does that mean? Caleb asked warily. It means we're going to find you a placement that doesn't treat you like a problem to be managed, Ms. Foster said firmly. And it means we're going to investigate what happened at the group home, because a child shouldn't have to run away 4 times to get someone to listen. The emergency foster home belonged to an older couple named Robert and Helen Chen. They lived in a quiet neighborhood in Sevierville, and their house smelled like cooking and had shelves full of books. They greeted Caleb kindly, but without excessive fuss, showing him to a small bedroom with a real bed and clean sheets. "You've had a big day," Helen said gently. "Why don't you get some rest? We can talk more in the morning." But Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, his mind racing through everything that had happened. The discovery of Isaiah's journal, the realization that he might be connected to this hidden history, the way Dr. Morrison and Ranger Green had treated the documents and him like they mattered. Around midnight, unable to stay still any longer, Caleb got up and crept downstairs. He found Robert Chen sitting in the living room, reading a thick history book by lamplight. "Couldn't sleep?" Robert asked, not seeming surprised to see him. Caleb shook his head. "Come sit," Robert said, patting the couch beside him. "Helen and I were foster kids ourselves, back in the day. Different era, different circumstances, but we remember what it's like. The not sleeping, the waiting for the other shoe to drop, the feeling like everything good is temporary." Caleb sat down cautiously. Officer Santos said, "I'm only here for a short time." "That's true," Robert said. "We do emergency placements, kids in crisis who need a safe place for a few days or weeks, while the state figures out something more permanent. But while you're here, you're safe, you're fed, you're warm, and nobody's going to hurt you or take things from you. That's a promise." "The other boys at the group home tore my mom's picture," Caleb said suddenly, the words coming out before he could stop them. "It was the only one I had, and they tore it." Robert's expression grew sad. "I'm sorry, Caleb. That's cruel and unfair, and it shouldn't have happened. Nobody cared. Mr. Harris said I was violent for fighting them, but nobody cared that they took my picture and destroyed it. Some adults," Robert said carefully, "are very good at seeing children's behavior without seeing the pain that causes that behavior. They see the fighting without seeing the loss that led to it. That doesn't make it right, but it explains it." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Robert said, "Officer Santos told us about what you found today. The documents from Isaiah Washington. That's pretty remarkable." "Dr. Morrison thinks he might be my ancestor," Caleb said, "but I don't know how to find out for sure." "Well," Robert said, "I happen to be pretty good at genealogical research. Used to work as a librarian before I retired. If you want, tomorrow we could start looking into your family history. See if we can trace the connection." Caleb looked at this man who was being kind for no reason he could understand. "Why would you do that?" "Because it matters to you," Robert said simply. "And because helping kids matter to themselves is kind of what Helen and I do. It's why we became foster parents." The next morning, true to his word, Robert set up his laptop at the kitchen table and began teaching Caleb how to search genealogical databases. They started with what Caleb knew: his mother's name, his birth certificate, the few fragments of family history he remembered from before she died. "Your mother was Grace Washington," Robert said, typing. "Born in Knoxville in 1985. Let's see if we can find her parents in the census records." They worked for 2 hours, slowly building a family tree backward through time. Grace Washington's parents: David and Ruth Washington. David's parents: Samuel and Esther Washington. Samuel's parents: Joseph and Mary Washington. Each generation took them further back, closer to Isaiah's time. "Now, this is interesting," Robert said, pulling up a 1940 census record. Joseph Washington, born 1897 in Tennessee. Father's name listed as Josiah Washington. Mother's name, Anna Washington. He looked at Caleb. "In Isaiah's journal, did he mention his children's names?" Caleb closed his eyes, trying to remember. "He mentioned a son, I think. I think it was Josiah." He wrote about teaching Josiah to hunt in the forest near their cabin. Robert pulled up another database. 1900 census for Cades Cove, Tennessee. Let's see. He scrolled through entries, then stopped. Here. Isaiah Washington, age 56. Wife Martha Washington, age 52. Children living at home: Josiah, age 18. Sarah, age 16. Ruth, age 14. He looked at Caleb with growing excitement. If this Josiah is the same one who later had a son named Joseph, and that Joseph is your great-great-grandfather, then Isaiah Washington is your great-great-great-great-grandfather. Caleb stared at the screen, at the names of people who shared his blood, who had lived over a century ago in these same mountains. So, it's real. I really am his descendant. "Looks that way," Robert confirmed. "Which means when Isaiah wrote in his journal about hiding documents for his family to find, he was writing to you. Across more than 90 years, he was reaching out to you specifically." A knock on the door interrupted them. Helen answered and returned with Officer Santos, Ms. Foster, and Dr. Morrison from the Park Service. "We've been researching Isaiah Washington's family," Dr. Morrison said without preamble, her excitement evident. "We contacted the Family History Center in Knoxville, and they've been pulling records all night. Caleb, we can definitively trace your family line back to Isaiah. You are his direct descendant through his son Josiah. Which means," Ms. Foster added, "that you have a legitimate personal interest in how his story is told and how his artifacts are handled. It also means," she pulled out a folder, "that you might have legal standing regarding the land Isaiah owned in Cades Cove." "What does that mean?" Caleb asked. "It means Isaiah's property was taken through eminent domain when the park was created," Ms. Foster explained. "But according to the documents you found, black families were systematically undercompensated compared to white landowners for equivalent property. There have been legal precedents for descendants of dispossessed landowners to seek redress, or at least formal acknowledgement of the injustice." "You're saying I could sue the government?" Caleb asked, confused. "Not exactly," Dr. Morrison interjected. "But what your discovery has done is open up a conversation about historical injustice in the park's creation. The National Park Service is already discussing how to acknowledge and address the systematic exclusion and undercompensation of black families in Cades Cove. Your grandfather's documents prove what we've long suspected, but couldn't demonstrate." "But there's something else," Officer Santos said, her expression serious. "Caleb, when did you say your mother died?" 4 years ago. I was 6. She had cancer." "And your father?" "I never knew him. Mom said he left before I was born." Officer Santos exchanged glances with Ms. Foster. "We've been doing some digging. Your mother's death certificate lists her parents, your grandparents, as deceased. But we can't find death certificates for them, which made us wonder if they're still alive, but were listed as deceased because they weren't in contact with your mother." Caleb's heart began to pound. "Are you saying I have grandparents?" "We're saying we're investigating," Ms. Foster said carefully. "We found a David Washington, age 58, living in Maryville, Tennessee. He has a daughter named Grace, who would be the right age. We've reached out to him, and he's willing to meet with you, if you want to meet him." "Why wouldn't he have tried to find me?" Caleb asked, hurt and hope warring in his chest. "If he's my grandfather, why did I end up in foster care?" "That's what we need to find out," Ms. Foster said gently. "Sometimes families lose touch for complicated reasons. Sometimes people don't know they're needed. We don't have all the answers yet. But if David Washington is your grandfather, and if he wants to be in your life, this changes everything about your placement options." Dr. Morrison cleared her throat. "There's one more thing. The Park Service has decided to mount a special exhibition about Black families in Cades Cove, centered on Isaiah Washington's documents and your discovery of them. We'd like you to be involved in creating that exhibition, helping us tell the story, maybe even speaking at the opening, if you're comfortable with that." Caleb looked around at the adults gathered in Robert and Helen Chen's living room, adults who seemed genuinely invested in his well-being, in his history, in his future. It was overwhelming and terrifying, and more hope than he had allowed himself to feel in years. "When can I meet him?" Caleb asked quietly. "My grandfather, if that's who he is. When can I meet him?" "Today," Ms. Foster said. "If you're ready. He's waiting at my office. He drove up as soon as we called him." She paused. "Caleb, I need you to understand. This might not work out the way you hope. Even if he is your grandfather, there might be reasons he can't take custody. Complicated family history? Unresolved issues? I don't want you to get your hopes up too high." "But there's a chance," Caleb asked. "There's a chance," Ms. Foster confirmed. Caleb looked at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. "Whatever happens," Robert said, "Helen and I are here for as long as you need us. But I think you should meet this man. See what's possible." David Washington stood as they entered Ms. Foster's office. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with gray in his hair and beard, wearing work clothes that suggested he'd come straight from a job site. But it was his eyes that made Caleb's breath catch. Dark brown eyes that looked exactly like his mother's, exactly like the eyes Caleb saw in the mirror every morning. "Caleb," the man said, his voice rough with emotion. "Lord, you look just like Grace when she was your age." Caleb stood frozen in the doorway, not knowing what to say or do. Ms. Foster gently guided him to a chair, and David sat back down across from him, his hands trembling slightly on the table between them. "I know you must have questions," David began, "and I know you must be angry. I would be too, if I were you. So I'm just going to tell you the truth, and you can decide what you want to do with it." He took a deep breath. "Your mother and I had a falling out when she was 17. She was dating a man I didn't approve of, your father, and when I told her she couldn't see him anymore, she left home, just packed a bag and walked out. I was stubborn and angry, and I told her she couldn't come back until she admitted I was right." His voice broke. "And she never did come back, and I never went after her. I told myself she'd come home when she was ready, that she needed to learn her lesson. But she didn't come back. And by the time I swallowed my pride and tried to find her, she'd moved to Chattanooga, gotten pregnant with you, and cut off all contact. Tears were streaming down David's face now. I didn't know she was sick. I didn't know she died until 3 years after it happened. A friend of hers tracked me down and told me. And by then, you were already in the system. I tried to find you, but they told me my parental rights were never established, that I'd have to go through the courts, that it would take years. I hired a lawyer, filed petitions, but the system moves slow. And now they call me and tell me you've been running away from placements, that you're in trouble, and that you found something that proved you're connected to Isaiah Washington's family, my family. And I got in my truck immediately because I'm not losing you again, like I lost your mother. The silence in the room was heavy. Caleb stared at this man who claimed to be his grandfather, trying to process everything he'd just heard. "You said it was your family," Caleb finally said. "Isaiah Washington, you knew about him?" David nodded. "My grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, was Joseph Washington. He used to tell me stories about his grandfather Isaiah, about the family land in Cades Cove, about how they were forced out when the park was created. He said Isaiah had hidden family documents somewhere, but they were never found. He died believing our family history was lost forever." David's voice filled with wonder. "And then, yesterday, the state calls me and says you found Isaiah's cash, that you found everything he hid. That's not coincidence, Caleb. That's legacy. That's you being exactly where you were supposed to be." "I wasn't supposed to be running away from a group home," Caleb said bitterly. "I wasn't supposed to be in foster care at all." "No," David agreed, his voice heavy with regret. "You weren't. You were supposed to be with family, with me. And I failed you by not fighting harder, by not being stubborn enough to break through the bureaucracy and get you home where you belonged." Ms. Foster cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Washington, we need to discuss the practical realities. You're saying you want custody of Caleb?" "I'm saying he's my grandson, and he belongs with me," David said firmly. "I have a 3-bedroom house in Maryville. I run my own construction business, steady income, health insurance, the whole thing. I'm 58 years old, in good health, no criminal record. And I've been trying to get custody of this boy for 3 years. Why didn't the caseworkers tell me?" Caleb asked. "Why didn't anyone tell me I had a grandfather looking for me?" Ms. Foster looked uncomfortable. "That's something we're investigating. There should have been documentation of Mr. Washington's custody petitions in your file. The fact that there wasn't suggests either serious oversight or," she paused, "deliberate suppression of information. We're looking into it." "Deliberate?" David's voice rose. "You're telling me someone deliberately kept me from my grandson?" "We don't have proof of that yet," Ms. Foster said carefully. "But the system is sometimes complicated, especially when relatives try to claim custody after a child has been placed. Some caseworkers prioritize placement stability over family reunification." "That's a nice way of saying they decided their paperwork was more important than this boy's right to be with his family," David said angrily. Officer Santos, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Mr. Washington, I understand you're upset, but right now, what matters is moving forward. Ms. Foster, what are the options here?" "I'm recommending immediate kinship placement," Ms. Foster said. "Given the documented attempts Mr. Washington has made to gain custody, given Caleb's repeated escape attempts from institutional care, and given the lack of success with previous placements, I believe it's in Caleb's best interest to be placed with his grandfather while we expedite the custody process." "How long will that take?" David asked. "Normally, months, but I'm going to push for emergency approval within 2 weeks. We'll need home studies, background checks, standard procedure. But given the circumstances, I think we can move quickly." She looked at Caleb. "How do you feel about this? I know this is a lot to process. You just met your grandfather today. You don't have to decide right now if you're not ready." Caleb looked at David, at this man who had his mother's eyes, who had tried to find him, who had come immediately when called. He thought about Isaiah Washington's letter, about family being worth fighting for, about the importance of knowing where you came from. "I want to try," Caleb said quietly. "I want to be with family." David's face crumpled with relief and joy. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Over the next 10 days, Caleb stayed with Robert and Helen Chen while the custody process moved forward. But David visited every day, sometimes bringing lunch, sometimes just sitting and talking, slowly building a relationship with the grandson he'd been searching for. He brought photographs, pictures of Grace as a child, pictures of Joseph and his wife, pictures of family gatherings that Caleb had never known existed. He told stories about the Washington family, about their history in Tennessee, about the pride they'd always had in being descended from Isaiah, despite never being able to prove it. "Your great-great-grandfather Joseph used to say that Isaiah Washington was the freest man he'd ever known," David told Caleb one afternoon. "Not because he'd escaped slavery, though he had, but because even after everything was taken from him, he never let them take his dignity or his belief that he mattered. That's the legacy he left us. And that's what you showed when you found his documents and made sure his story would be told. You're living up to that legacy, Caleb." Dr. Morrison continued working with Caleb on the exhibition about Black families in Cades Cove. They spent hours going through Isaiah's journal together, with Caleb helping to provide context about his family's oral history, and Dr. Morrison explaining the historical significance of each entry. "The park is planning a major ceremony," Dr. Morrison told Caleb and David. "We're going to formally acknowledge the Black families who were displaced when the park was created and commit to telling their stories as part of the official park narrative. And we'd like you both to speak at the ceremony." "Me?" Caleb asked, surprised. "You're the one who found Isaiah's cache," Dr. Morrison said. "You're the one who brought this history back to light. Your voice matters in telling this story." But not everyone was happy about the attention Caleb's discovery was receiving. Mr. Harris from the group home filed a complaint, claiming that Caleb had stolen property from the facility when he ran away, and that any historical artifacts he found should be confiscated. The complaint was quickly dismissed, but it revealed the bitterness of someone who'd been exposed as negligent. More serious was a call Ms. Foster received from an attorney representing concerned historians who claimed that the documents Caleb found needed to be verified by independent experts before the Park Service made any official acknowledgments based on them. "They're worried about what?" David asked when Ms. Foster told them about it. "Authenticity," Ms. Foster said. "They're suggesting the documents might be forgeries planted recently rather than genuine historical artifacts." "That's ridiculous," Dr. Morrison said, present for the conversation. "We've had multiple experts examine the paper, the ink, the writing implements used. Everything is consistent with 1920s origin. The degradation patterns, the style of writing, the historical details that would be nearly impossible to fake, all of it points to authenticity." "Then what's really going on?" David asked. Dr. Morrison sighed. "What's going on is that acknowledging the systematic dispossession of Black landowners in the park's creation opens up uncomfortable questions about the Park Service's history. Some people would prefer those questions stay buried." "Well, they're not going to stay buried," David said firmly. Not if Caleb and I have anything to say about it. The custody hearing was held on a Wednesday morning, 12 days after Caleb had found Isaiah's cache. The judge was an older white man who looked stern until he smiled, which transformed his whole face. "Mr. Washington," the judge said, "I've reviewed your petition for custody. I've also reviewed the documentation showing your 3 years of attempts to locate and gain custody of your grandson. Can you explain to me why it took 3 years?" David explained about the caseworkers who said he couldn't get custody because he hadn't been in Caleb's life before Grace died, about the paperwork that got lost, about the lawyers who said the process would be long and difficult. The judge's expression grew darker as David spoke. "Ms. Foster," the judge said when David finished, "I'm ordering an investigation into why Mr. Washington's custody petitions weren't properly processed. This appears to be a significant failure of the system." He looked at Caleb. "Young man, do you want to live with your grandfather?" "Yes, sir," Caleb said clearly. "Any reservations? Any concerns?" Caleb thought about that. "Sometimes I'm scared it won't work out, that I'll mess it up like I messed up all the other placements. But I want to try. I want to be with family." The judge nodded. "Mr. Washington, I'm granting you full custody of your grandson, effective immediately. Welcome home, Caleb." 3 months after Caleb Washington found refuge in a hollow tree and discovered his family's hidden history, he stood in front of 200 people at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park Visitor Center, preparing to speak at the dedication ceremony for The Invisible Families, Black Land Ownership in Cades Cove, 1867-1928. He wasn't alone on the stage. David stood beside him, one hand resting supportively on Caleb's shoulder. Dr. Morrison was there, along with Ranger Green and several descendants of other black families who had lived in Cades Cove. But the spotlight was on Caleb, the boy who had found what everyone else had missed. 3 months ago, Caleb began, his voice nervous but growing stronger. "I was running away from a group home. I was scared and angry, and I felt like nobody cared about me. I crawled inside a fallen oak tree to hide, and I found a metal box that had been hidden there for 95 years. He held up a photograph, a reproduction of one of the images from Isaiah's cache, showing Isaiah and his family standing proudly in front of their Cades Cove cabin. This is Isaiah Washington. He was born enslaved in 1844. After the Civil War, he came to Cades Cove and bought 40 acres of land with money he'd saved for 12 years. He built a home. He raised a family. He paid his taxes. He did everything right. And then, in 1928, when the government created this park, they took his land. They paid him half of what they paid white landowners for equivalent property. They erased his family from the historical record. And they tried to make it so that nobody would ever know black families had lived here and built lives here and mattered here." Caleb paused, looking at the audience. He saw Robert and Helen Chen, who had fostered him during those crucial 2 weeks. He saw Officer Santos and Ms. Foster, who had fought to get him placed with family. He saw other foster kids who'd been brought to the ceremony, children who needed to know that their stories mattered too. But Isaiah Washington refused to be erased. He wrote a journal documenting everything: his life, his land ownership, what happened to his family, and he hid it in a tree where he used to hunt with his son, hoping that someday someone in his family would find it. Caleb's voice grew emotional. And 95 years later, his great-great-great-great-grandson crawled into that tree, looking for a place to hide. And I found what he left. I found proof that my family was here, that we built, that we owned, that we mattered. He looked at David, who was crying openly. And finding that proof changed my life, because it led me to my grandfather. who I didn't know existed. It led me to family. It led me home. Dr. Morrison stepped forward to speak about the historical significance of the documents, about how they'd changed the park's understanding of its own history. She announced that the Park Service was committing to a comprehensive research project documenting all Black families who had lived in the Smokies before the park's creation, ensuring their stories would be preserved and shared. But the most powerful moment came when David spoke, his voice carrying across the quiet auditorium. Isaiah Washington wrote in his journal that he was hiding his family's records so we would know we came from people who refused to be invisible. For 4 generations, we told stories about Isaiah, about the land in Cades Cove, about what was taken from us. But we had no proof. We were just another Black family with stories about lost land, stories that nobody believed. He put his arm around Caleb, and then this boy, my grandson, who I'd been searching for, found the proof, found the documents, found the truth that Isaiah preserved. And in doing that, he gave our family back our history. He gave us back our dignity. He showed us that we do matter, that we did build something, that we were here. The ceremony ended with the unveiling of a new permanent exhibit in the Park Visitor Center, featuring Isaiah's journal, the photographs, and the property deeds. A plaque read, "The Black families of Cades Cove built lives and communities in these mountains. When the park was created, they were systematically undercompensated and erased from the historical record." This exhibition, made possible by the discovery of documents hidden by Isaiah Washington and found by his descendant Caleb Washington in 2024, ensures their stories are finally told. After the ceremony, people approached Caleb, descendants of other Black families, historians, journalists, and, most meaningfully, other foster kids who had been brought to see that children in the system could do something important. One girl, maybe 13, approached shyly. "I'm in foster care too," she said quietly. "7th placement. I keep messing up. But hearing your story, it made me think maybe I could find something important too. Maybe I matter even though nobody seems to want me." Caleb looked at this girl who reminded him so much of himself 3 months ago. "You do matter," he said firmly. "You matter right now, not just if you find something or do something important. You matter because you exist. And the adults who made you feel like you don't matter? They're wrong." Over the following weeks, Caleb settled into life with David. It wasn't perfect. They had arguments and misunderstandings. Caleb still had nightmares sometimes. David still struggled with guilt about the years they'd lost. But they were family, and they were building something real. David's house became a gathering place for the scattered Washington family, cousins and aunts and uncles that Caleb hadn't known existed, all coming together to celebrate the rediscovery of their history. They shared stories about Isaiah and the generations that followed, piecing together a family narrative that had been fragmented by displacement and time. The school Caleb attended in Maryville was better than any he'd been to before. His teachers knew his story and treated him with respect rather than suspicion. He made friends, real friends who liked him for himself, not despite his foster care history, but simply because of who he was. And he returned to the park often, sometimes with David, sometimes with school groups, to talk about Isaiah Washington and the importance of preserving hidden histories. He became, in a way, the living bridge between past and present, between the ancestor who hid the truth and the descendants who needed to hear it. Dr. Morrison invited him to help with the ongoing research project, teaching him how to read old census records and property deeds, how to piece together family histories from fragments of documentation. Caleb discovered he loved this work, the detective aspect of historical research, the the satisfaction of finding pieces that completed a puzzle. "You're good at this," Dr. Morrison told him one afternoon as they worked through records from the 1880 census. "Have you thought about becoming a historian, specializing in hidden histories, in stories that have been erased or overlooked?" Caleb hadn't thought about his future in those terms, hadn't dared to imagine having a future that mattered beyond just surviving. But now, surrounded by documents and family and purpose, he could see it. A future where he helped other families recover their lost histories, a future where he made sure more Isaiah Washingtons weren't forgotten. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Yeah, I think I'd like that." 6 months after finding Isaiah's cache, Caleb stood in the hollow tree again, this time with a film crew documenting the location for a National Park Service educational program. The tree looked smaller than he remembered, less frightening, less desperate. "This is where you found the box?" the interviewer asked. "Yeah, right in that crack in the wood." Caleb pointed to the crevice where Isaiah had hidden his family's legacy. "I was just looking for somewhere to hide, somewhere safe. I didn't know I was going to find my whole family history." "How has finding it changed your life?" Caleb thought about that question, really thought about it. 3 months ago, he would have said it changed everything. But now, with distance and perspective, he understood something more nuanced. "It didn't change who I am," Caleb said slowly. "I was always Isaiah Washington's descendant. I was always part of this family, this history. What changed was that I knew it. I understood where I came from, and that helped me understand where I could go." He looked at the camera directly. "There are a lot of kids in foster care who feel like I felt, invisible, unwanted, like they don't matter. And I want them to know that they do matter. Even if they never find hidden documents or discover family secrets, they matter just because they exist. Their stories are important. Their lives have value. And sometimes, the most important discoveries aren't about what's buried in trees or hidden in boxes. They're about discovering that you're worth caring about, worth fighting for, worth remembering." The interview ended, and the crew packed up their equipment. David had waited nearby, giving Caleb space but staying close. As they walked back to the truck together, David asked, "You okay? Being back here?" "Yeah," Caleb said, and he meant it. "I'm good. This tree, it was a refuge when I needed one. It gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. And it gave me back my family. I'm grateful for it." They drove home to Maryville, to the house that was becoming home, to a life that was becoming real. On the dashboard, Caleb had taped a quote from Isaiah's journal, one that he'd copied carefully by hand. "To my descendants, you come from people who built, who owned, who mattered. Never let anyone make you invisible. Your existence is resistance. Your dignity is inheritance. Your truth is power." Caleb read those words every day, and every day they reminded him that he wasn't just a foster kid who got lucky. He was Isaiah Washington's descendant, part of a legacy of survival and resistance and refusing to be erased. He was part of a story that stretched back generations and would continue forward into a future he was now free to imagine. And sometimes, when things got hard, or when he felt the old fears creeping back, Caleb would close his eyes and picture Isaiah hiding that metal box in the tree, believing that someday someone would find it, believing that truth mattered, believing that family would remember. Isaiah had been right, and Caleb Washington, 10 years old, former foster kid, finder of hidden histories, was living proof. Would you like to see the continuation of this story and uncover the other secrets hidden in these lands? Leave a comment, share this video, and stay tuned. because the next mystery may be even bigger.